The ewe had been laboring since before the lamp went dry, and Maren Holt knew. Kneeling in the straw with her sleeve pushed past the elbow, that she was about to lose them both. The lamb was turned wrong inside, a foreleg and the head folded back where they had no business being. And every time the ewe strained, nothing came but the same animal sound of an effort that goes nowhere.
Something is terribly wrong.
Maren's hand was inside the warmth of the creature, up to the wrist. She could feel the small, hard knob of a hoof and could not, for the life of her, find the second one. Outside, the March wind came down off the Bitterroot peaks the way it always did that time of year, mean and patient, looking for the gaps in the barn boards. The single candle threw her shadow huge against the wall. Behind her, in the doorway, 8-year-old Tess stood holding a tin cup of water that nobody had asked for, because holding it was the only useful thing she could think to do. Is she going to die, Mama? Go back to the house, Tess. But is she go to the house? The girl did not go. Maren did not have the strength to make her. She had been awake for 19 hours, and the part of her that managed the world had narrowed down to one slick, desperate question. Where is the other foot? This is the thing they do not tell you about a widow's ranch. It is not the grief that breaks you, Fu. Grief you can carry. It is the arithmetic. It is 213 head of sheep, and 160 acres of grass and creek, and one woman and a child, and a ledger at the Stevensville Bank with a number at the bottom of it, $312. That grows a little every season, no matter how little she sleeps. Her husband, Henry, had known sheep the way some men know scripture. He had died 2 winters back, not dramatically, just a cough that settled in and would not leave. And then one gray morning he simply did not wake, and the knowing in his head went into the ground with him on the rise above the creek. He had left her the flock and the land, and a great deal of work he had always made look easy. And now a ewe was dying under her hands, because Maren did not know the trick of it, the way Henry had known the trick of it, and she was too proud and too far from town to do anything but try. That was when the dog started barking at the road. Not the lazy bark she gave a coyote scent. The other one, a person. Maren did not move her hand. Tess, look out the door. Don't open it wide. The girl set down her cup and went, a cold draft. Then her small voice gone careful. There's a man, Mama. Walking. He's got a bag. Out here in the Montana Territory, in the spring of 1885, a stranger walking up your road in the dark was not a thing a woman alone welcomed. But Maren's hand was inside a dying animal, and pride is a luxury that does not survive contact with a lambing gone wrong. She heard the gate. She heard boots on frozen mud. And then a voice from the barn door, low and unhurried. A voice that did not announce itself so much as simply arrive. Ma'am, your dog says you've got trouble. Sounds like you've got it inside an animal. She turned her head. The man filled the doorway, lamplight catching him in pieces. Tall, lean, somewhere near 40, a flat-brimmed hat dark with old rain and a canvas bag in one hand. His face was not a soft face. But the eyes, when they found the ewe, did not look at her, or at the candle, or at the rifle she did not have. They went straight to the animal and read it. 4 leg back, he said. It was not a question. And I can't find the other foot, Maren said, and hated how the words shook. You won't pushing. She's been at it too long. She's swelled up tight in there. He was already setting the bag down, already shrugging out of his coat, already rolling his sleeve. May I? She should have said no. A sane woman says no. Instead, Maren drew her arm out, slick to the elbow, and moved aside because somewhere underneath the fear was a colder, clearer thing that had recognized competence the second he spoke. the way you recognize your own name." The stranger knelt. He did not rush. He laid one broad hand flat on the ew's heaving flank and held it there a moment, the way you'd quiet a frightened child, and the animal's panic dropped by a measurable degree. Then he wet his hand and arm from the lard tin Maren kept by and went in slow. "You have to push the whole lamb back first," he said, quiet, more to the room than to her. "Against everything she's telling you. Make room. Then you walk the head around." His arm moved in small, patient increments. Sweat stood on his forehead, though the barn was near freezing. There's a cup of his face. There's the eye socket. Gentle, gentle, now the leg. A long minute. The wind, the candle. Tess in the doorway with both hands over her mouth. "There," the man breathed. "Both feet. Both feet and a nose, that's a lamb that wants to live." He looked up at Maren for the first time, really looked, and there was nothing in it but the work. "Next time she pushes, you pull. Down and out, toward her heels, follow the curve. Together now." The ewe strained. They pulled, and in a rush of steam and fluid, the lamb came free into the straw, impossibly long-legged, slick and still. Too still. The man had it across his knees before Maren could speak. He cleared the muck from its mouth with one finger, swung a little straw to tickle inside its nose, and when nothing happened, he bent and breathed 2 short breaths into it and rubbed the small ribs hard with his knuckles, brisk, almost rough. "Come on," he said low. "Come on now." The lamb coughed, shuddered, kicked one impossible leg and bawled. A thin, outraged, gorgeous sound that filled the whole frozen barn. Tess burst into tears. Maren found she was not far off it herself. The man laid the lamb at the ew's head and sat back on his heels, and let the mother do the rest, the rough tongue, the low talking sound a ewe makes. He was breathing hard now, and then he did a thing Maren would remember for a long time, longer than she expected to. He took off his own coat, the only coat he had, she would learn, and he laid it over the wet lamb against the cold. Not over himself, over the animal. He did not look at her when he did it, so he did not see her notice. "I'm obliged to you," Maren said finally. Her voice had steadied. "I don't have money to pay you. I want to be honest about that before anything else. Didn't ask for any." He was wiping his arm on a twist of clean straw. "Then what are you doing on my road at this hour?" He stood, retrieved his hat. "Walking to the next thing," he said. "Same as most folks. I doctor stock for my keep, horses, cattle, sheep. I was an Army veterinary surgeon, 8 years before I wasn't. Name's Asa Whitfield." A pause. "Your flock's got something else wrong with it, ma'am. I could smell it coming up the road. I'd rather tell you straight than let you find it in a month." Maren went still. "Tell me." "You've got scab," Asa said. "Sheep's scab. I'd want light to be sure, but the rubbing posts by your gate are hung with wool, and 3 of the ewes I passed in the fold have got that look. Chewing at their own sides, the wool coming off in sheets." He let it sit, because he was the kind of man who let hard things sit rather than dress them up. "It spreads. It'll take the whole flock before shearing if it's not treated. And a scabbed flock isn't worth hauling to market. 213 head. $312 at the bank. The arithmetic, doing what it always did. There's a lean-to off the rear of the barn," Maren heard herself say. "It was the hired man's before we couldn't afford one. There's a stove. It's not warm, but it's out of the wind." She looked at him levelly, this stranger who had put his coat on her lamb. "Supper's at 6. We don't keep late and we lock the house. You treat my flock, you eat, and you sleep dry until it's done. After that we'll see." Asa Whitfield looked at her a moment. "That's a fair offer," he said. "More than fair, it's the only one I've got." Tess, who had stopped crying, said into the quiet, "What do we call the lamb?" The man almost smiled. He did not quite get there, but Maren saw the place where the smile lived. "That's yours to say, miss," he told her. "You held the water." In the weeks that followed, Maren learned what kind of man Asa Whitfield was the way you learn anything true out there. Not by what he said, because he said very little, but by what he did when he thought no one was counting. He found the scab and he fought it the way a man fights a fire he has fought before. First, he showed her the might itself, a thing she had never seen and would never unsee. He scraped at the raw edge of a sore with his knife and held the blade to the light, and there it was, a moving speck no bigger than dust. "Seroptic mange," he said. "It's the might, not a curse and not bad blood. It burrows and it bites, and the sheep tears itself raw trying to answer the itch. Kill the might, you've cured the flock. That's the whole of it. Folks make it a mystery. It isn't." He built a dipping trough. He and Maren dug it out below the spring and lined it with stone and clay. 2 days of cold mud work, and he showed her how to mix the dip. Lime and flowers of sulfur boiled down into a foul yellow broth that stank up the whole draw. Has to be near as hot as the sheep can stand, and they go under to the chin. Ears too, everything but the nose, he said. And you hold each one down a slow count, then you do it again in 10 days. Because the eggs hatch after you've killed the grown ones, and a man who dips once and calls it finished has wasted his lime. It was wretched work. The sheep hated it, and said so. Maren's hands cracked and bled at the knuckles from the lime and the cold water, and Asa, without a word about it, started leaving a tin of mutton tallow on the stone by the trough each morning, rendered soft for her hands. She never thanked him for it, because to thank him would be to admit she'd noticed, and noticing felt like the top of a hill she was not ready to over. But she used it, and he saw the tin go down, and said nothing, and that was its own conversation. He fixed what he found broken. The foot rot, which she had not even known was foot rot, 6 ewes gone lame, and Maren had thought it was the wet ground. Asa flipped one onto its rump as easy as turning a page, pared the diseased horn off the hoof with a curved knife until it bled clean, and stood the whole limping handful in a shallow box of blue stone water. Copper-sulfate, he called it, the same blue crystal a body could buy by the pound at any decent mercantile. Trim, then soak, then dry ground, he said. There's no medicine for it half so good as a dry pasture, but a man can't always give them that, so he gives them this. Tess followed him everywhere. She had named the lamb sergeant, for reasons no one could get out of her, and Sergeant followed Tess, so there was generally a procession. The girl asked him 100 questions a day, and he answered everyone as though it were a serious question from a serious person, which Maren noticed, because Henry had been the only other man she'd known who did that. He taught Tess to read a sheep's eye for sickness, to know death camas from wild onion in the spring grass. The onion smells like onion, child. If it doesn't smell, don't let the flock near it. To spot the staggering, the head-pressing look of an animal that's been into the larkspur on the high slope. Knowledge, handed down to a child in a fold, the way it had always been handed down. And Maren watched her daughter come back to life a little, and did not know what to do with the feeling. She told herself it was the work. She told herself a great many things that spring. What she could not explain away was the morning she came down before light. Certain she was the first awake, as she had been every morning for 2 years, and found the stove already going and the coffee already on. Made strong, the way she took it, the way she had mentioned exactly once. Asa was outside at the fold. By then, a shape in the blue dark moving among the sheep. He had made the coffee and left it and gone to work and said nothing. Maren stood in her own kitchen, holding a warm cup she had not made, and felt something she had decided. 2 years ago she was finished feeling, and was angry about it, and drank the coffee anyway. The trouble, when it came from the direction trouble usually came from, which was the Vane place to the south. Garrett Vane ran cattle, a great many cattle, on open range that bordered Maren's deeded ground, and he held the old opinion, common and fierce in those years, that sheep ruined grass for cattle, cropping it to the root and fouling the water. There was money in that opinion, and there was pride in it, and Vane had both. He had come to Maren twice since Henry died with an offer for her land and her water rights, an offer pitched low and wrapped in concern, the way a strong man wraps a thing he means to simply take. She had refused him both times. On the second, his eyes had drifted toward the house and toward the girl framed in the window, in a way that kept Maren awake long after. He came again on a bright, cold day in late April, riding down with 2 of his hands, and he found a stranger leaning on Maren's gate. "Where's the widow Holt?" Vane said, not unkindly. He had a wide, reasonable face and the soft, ringed hands of a man who paid others to do the hard parts. "Mrs. Holt's at the house," Asa said. "I look after the stock here. Anything for her can come through me. And who would you be? Asa Whitfield." Vane's eyes went over him. The worn coat, the lack of a gun, the calm. "Well, Mr. Whitfield, you can tell her my offer stands, and the number's the same. This is no country for a woman alone to run sheep, and everybody in the valley knows it but her. I'm trying to do her a kindness before the winter does her an unkindness." Asa was quiet a moment. When he spoke, it was not sharp. It was almost gentle, which was worse. "I expect she knows her own country, Mr. Vane, and the flock's healthy. We cleared the scab out of it 3 weeks back." He paused. "How's yours?" Something flickered behind Vane's face. "My what?" "Your cattle. I passed your south range coming in. You've got animals down in the wet ground by the slough, and a few of them walking stiff. If it's what I think it is, it won't wait on your convenience." Vane's jaw set. "My stock's my business." "It surely is," Asa agreed, and tipped his hat, and that was all. The cattleman rode off harder than he'd come. Maren, watching from the porch, came down to the gate when the dust had settled. "You shouldn't have baited him," she said. "Didn't bait him," Asa said, looking after the riders. "Told him the truth and let him do what he wanted with it. Man's got sick cattle and too much pride to ask anybody for help. That's a bad combination going into a Montana summer." He turned and looked at her, and for the first time there was something uncertain in his face. Some private weather. "I've seen what comes of too much pride and a sick herd. Up close." "Is that the story you don't tell?" Maren said. She had not planned to say it. It simply arrived, the way his voice had arrived that first night. Asa held his silence a good while. "It's part of it," he said, and he went back to the sheep. He told her the rest of it in May. On a night the frost came late, and they sat on the porch step after Tess was asleep, because it was too fine an evening to waste indoors, and neither of them said so. "I was a good army surgeon," he said, into the dark, not looking at her. "Best in my regiment," they said. "There was a fever came through the remount station in Kansas the summer of '78. Strangles in the horses. I knew what it was. I knew to pull the sick ones off, burn the bedding, keep the water clean and separate." He turned his hat in his hands, the way a man does when his hands need something to do. And the colonel had a review coming, and a review wants full corrals, and he ordered the sick horses kept in the line. I argued hard, And then I was a soldier, and I followed the order because that is what a soldier does." Maren said nothing. The right thing with a man like that was to let the silence hold the door. "Lost 140 head," Asa said, "and 2 boys who slept in that barn took the fever to their own throats the way it sometimes jumps, and one of them didn't come up from it. 19 years old." He stopped. Started again, lower. "I knew. That's the thing I carry. I knew, and I had the knowing, and I let a man with more rank and less sense put it in a drawer. I left the army inside the year. I've been doctoring strangers' stock up and down this country ever since, and I think some part of me believed if I kept enough other animals alive, it might come out even. A breath. It doesn't come out even. I know that now. But a man keeps trying anyhow." The creek talked to itself in the dark. Somewhere a sheep coughed and settled. "My husband died of a cough I thought was nothing," Maren said. The words felt strange in her mouth. She had never said them to a living soul. "I made him soup. I told him to rest. I had a flock to see to and a girl to feed, and I told myself it was nothing. And I have done that arithmetic 10,000 times since. What if I'd hitched the wagon and hauled him to the doctor in Stevensville the first week instead of the 3rd? She looked at her own hands, cracked and healing. "It doesn't come out even on my side either." For a while, neither of them spoke. They were not touching. There was a foot of cold porch board between them, and neither moved to close it. But something did close, all the same. Some long-held door, easing shut on a room that had been cold too long. "No," Asa said at last. "It doesn't. But you raised a child and you kept a flock alive doing it. That's not nothing, Mrs. Holt. That's about the furthest thing from nothing there is." She did not answer. She didn't trust her voice. But she did not go in, either, for a long while, and the 2 of them sat in the dark and watched the stars come out over the bitterroot, close enough to feel the warmth of, far enough apart to be proper, which was, that spring, exactly as far as either of them could bear to be. The blizzard came in the 2nd week of October, weeks before any blizzard had a right to, the way the bad ones sometimes do. The sky went the color of a bruise by noon, and the temperature fell off a cliff. And Maren knew with the certainty of someone who had lost a winter before, that the flock out on the high pasture would drift before the wind and pile into the coulees and smother under the snow if they were not brought down before dark. "It's too much ground for 2, she said, pulling on Henry's old oilskin. "I'll lose half of them." "You won't," Asa said, already saddling the gray. "Send the dog wide, and we'll bring them down the draw. Sheep'll string out behind a lead. We keep the lead moving toward home, the rest follow. We just can't let them stop." He looked at her hard through the first stinging flakes. "And we can't let you stop either. People die in this looking for sheep. If it comes to you or them, it's you. You've got a girl in that house. Say it back to me." "It's me," Maren said. "Not them, I hear you. They rode into it." What followed, Maren could never afterward put in order. The white roar of it, the wind that took the words out of your mouth, the dog appearing and vanishing like a gray thought. Asa's shape ahead of her in the murk, steady, always there when she looked. They found the flock, packed and panicking against the upper fence. They cut the wire themselves, rather than fight the gate. They got a lead ewe moving, and the flock poured after her down the draw in a long, dirty ribbon. And twice the whole mass tried to turn and stall and bury itself. And twice Asa drove the gray across the front of them and turned them back to the trail of home by main will, and a voice gone raw with shouting. They lost 4. Out of 213, they lost 4 to the coolies, and brought 209 into the home fold as the last light failed. and shut the gate, and stood in the lee of the barn, shaking with cold and the particular drunkenness of having lived through a thing. And it was there, in the howling dark, with ice in his eyebrows and his hands too numb to feel the latch, that Asa Whitfield said the truest thing he ever said to her, which was not a pretty thing, and was not meant to be. "I had a notion to move on before the snow," he said. He had to put his mouth near her ear to be heard. Had it half decided. Figured the flock was sound, and you didn't need a drifter eating your winter stores. He stopped. The wind. "I'm not going to do that." Maren turned. Their faces were a hand apart in the dark. "Why?" she said. "Because I'd be doing it to keep from wanting to stay," Asa said. "And I've spent 7 years running from things, and I find I don't want to run from this one." His voice was steady. There was no flourish in it, no poetry. Just a man setting a thing down where he could see it. "I'm not asking you for anything, Mrs. Holt. I know what you lost. I'd stay on the same terms, the barn room and supper, and never speak of it again, if that's what you want. But you ask me why, and I'll not lie to you in a snowstorm. That's why." For 2 years Maren had been a woman made entirely of arithmetic. Every hour weighed, every store counted, every feeling that cost more than it returned filed away unfelt. And she stood there with the worst storm of the early winter, trying to peel the coat off her back, and did the only sum that had ever come out clean. "Stay," she said, "and not in the barn." She did not say the rest. She didn't have to. He heard it the way he heard everything, by paying attention to what a person tells you without spending words on it. He reached out in the dark, and he did not pull her to him. He simply laid his cold hand against the side of her face, careful, like a man checking an animal he means to keep alive, and she leaned into the cold of it, and that was the whole of it, and it was enough. Garrett Vane lost 1/3 of his cattle that fall. Not to the blizzard, though the blizzard finished some of them. To the thing Asa had named at the gate in April, and Vane had been too proud to hear. Black leg in the young stock, a thing of the wet ground that a man can guard against if he'll listen, and can't cure once it's running. By November the Vane range was a hard place, and the cattleman who had ridden down so reasonable in the spring was a man staring at his own ledger, and finding the arithmetic had turned on him too. He came down the road in December on a tired horse. Alone this time, no hands behind him, and he sat the horse at Maren's gate, a long moment, as though the gate were heavier than it looked. Maren came out. Asa came and stood beside her, and Tess watched from the window, and the dog watched from the step. "Whitfield," Vane said. The reasonable voice had gone out of him. "You told me in April, by the slough." He stopped. He was not a man with much practice at this. "I've lost near 90 head. I've got 200 more I'd like to keep. I came to ask if you'd look at them." A pause that cost him everything. "I can't pay much. I know how that sounds, coming from me to her." Maren said nothing. This was Asa's to answer, and she'd learned the shape of his silences well enough by now to wait inside them. Asa looked at the cattleman for a long moment, and whatever Vane expected, gloating, refusal, the door shut the way Vane had tried to shut doors all spring. It was not what he got. "I'll come tomorrow at first light," Asa said. "Keep the sick ones off your good water tonight, separate, downstream. Don't move the dead. Burn them where they lie. Don't let the dogs at them. I'll show you the rest in the morning." He paused. "And you'll pay me by leaving this flock and this water bee. That's the whole of the bill. We're neighbors going into a hard winter, Vane. Out here that has to mean something, or none of us last." Garrett Vane looked at the three of them, standing at the gate of the place he had tried to buy out from under a widow. Something in his wide, reasonable face came apart and put itself back together, humbler. "It'll mean something," he said. "You have my hand on it." And he gave it to Asa, and then, after a beat, to Maren, which was its own kind of apology, and they both knew it. He kept his word. He generally did, after that. They were married in the spring, in the front room, by a circuit preacher who came through Stevensville once a month, with Tess holding the flowers and Garrett Vane, of all people, standing up as a witness in a clean collar, looking like a man still surprised to find himself a decent one. It was a small wedding. Maren had had a large one once, and found she preferred this. The quiet of it, the way the important things were said softly and meant. The shearing that June was the best the place had seen since Henry. 209 fleeces off a clean, scab-free flock, and the wool buyer in Stevensville ran it through his fingers and named a price that made Maren step outside to stand in the sun a minute by herself. She paid the bank to nothing that summer. $312, then zero. She stood at the teller's window and watched the man write the figure and underline it, and thought of all the mornings the arithmetic had sat on her chest like a stone, and walked out into the street feeling, for the first time in 3 years, that she was standing on ground that was wholly her own. And the years did what years do. It is an evening in late summer, several years on, that I want to leave you with. The flock is bigger now, near 400, and a hired man and his family in the cottage that used to stand empty. Tess is taller than her mother and reads the sky for weather better than most grown men in the valley, and she is teaching a smaller child now, a brother, to know death camas from wild onion in the grass. The onion smells like onion, and if it doesn't smell, you keep the lambs away. The knowing, handed down. Maren Holt. Maren Whitfield, these years now, sits on the top board of the south fence in the long gold light, and her husband climbs up beside her with the slow care of a man whose knees have started to keep their own ledger, and they watch the sheep move through the grass the way they have watched them 1,000 evenings, and do not feel any need to say so. "You ever think," she says, "what would have happened if your dog hadn't barked?" That first night, "Your dog," he says, "my dog, he considers it the way he considers everything, slowly and without hurry. I think I'd have walked on to the next thing," he says, "same as always, and never known what I walked past." She takes his hand on the rail. His knuckles are scarred from a lifetime of lime and cold water and the insides of laboring animals, and so are hers now. And the two sets of scars are a kind of language between them, the way her looking and his looking had been a language from the start. Here is the thing I have come to believe, telling stories like this one. We spend a great deal of our lives believing that the help we need will look like rescue, like someone arriving to lift the whole weight off us at once. It almost never does. More often it walks up your road in the dark with a worn coat and a canvas bag, and asks to be useful and lays its own coat over the cold thing instead of itself, and stays not because you needed saving, but because, somewhere along the way, two people who had each been carrying a private arithmetic of grief looked up and found the sum came out gentler shared. Maren did not need a man to save her ranch. She had been saving it herself, badly and bravely, for 2 years. What she needed, what we all need, I think, and so seldom say, was someone to stand at the same fence and look at the same sheep and call the long work worth doing. Someone to make the coffee strong, the way she took it, and say nothing about it. That is not rescue. It is something quieter, and a great deal harder to find. It is a place to stop, and someone worth stopping with. Thank you for spending this while with me and with Maren and Asa on the high grass under the bitterroot. If you found something here worth keeping, stay a while longer. There are more of these stories where this came from, and I'd be glad of your company on the next road. Rest easy tonight. The flock is in, and the gate is shut.